Anybody have any questions before we start that you want to ask Larry about any real estate related topic?
Yes,
Okay.
question, Larry.
Okay.
If someone writes a contract or presents an offer with conventional financing, but then they say there are no contingencies. They're saying they're waiving financing contingency and the appraisal contingency. But they are using conventional financing. How is it that they're able to waive the financing contingency?
Well, they can waive under conventional. They can't waive under FHA and VA because the programs protect people. But under conventional, they can do it, but they still need to make sure, and that's going to be one of the things I want to talk about today, that if they don't get their mortgage, that they have the cash to be able to go to settlement. So if they don't have the cash funds, they could be putting themselves in a default position.
Right.
But,
so if we're representing the seller and someone presents an offer saying, they do have an approval or pre-approval letter, the letter doesn't look like it's, they claim that everything has been underwritten, so they're good to go. So they're waiving the financing and the appraisal contingency. Is there something else that we should ask for on behalf of the seller?
Not really. Not really. I mean, the seller would always be in a position they could sue for damages if there was a default. You could ask for them to prove that they could go forward if they don't get their loan. But if they're presenting first of all, let's address that pre-approval letter. It means absolutely nothing. You understand that, right?
Okay. Mm-hmm.
Okay. Because they could not have made loan application for a property until you have that property address under contract. Okay. So but at least if they met with the lender and done everything they can prior, then they feel pretty comfortable. They're the ones that would be in a default position. The one thing you might want to do is make sure there's a pretty good size earnest money deposit in case of a default.
Okay.
Because the seller is not automatically entitled to the deposit, but at least if there's a big deposit, it's going to be held until there's a settlement by a judge if it had to go to that. The earnest money deposit increased that. And one thing about that earnest money deposit, a lot of agents are under the misconception that if there's a default by the buyer, the seller automatically gets that deposit, and they don't. That deposit's held in escrow for both parties. So even if you go to court, say you had a $20,000 earnest money deposit, and it goes before a judge, and let's say that the contract went into default. 2 days later, your seller got a contract for $20,000 more than what the original contract was. So when they sue, a judge would look to, when it comes to that deposit, they're going to look to see if there were any damages. Okay. Because that deposit cannot be awarded for a penalty. It can only be for damages. So sometimes people get an attorney because of the large deposit, because they figure that, hey, your seller didn't lose a whole lot of money. So that deposit is not for a penalty. That's not allowed in Virginia, only for actual damages. So if a judge looks and your seller had, made additional 20, and you know, they look to see how much your payments were, et cetera. You know, there's a good possibility they're not going to get all that deposit, but hopefully people will release it and say, okay, yeah, I defaulted, here's your money. But that's about the only thing you can do. Conventional, they could waive everything, right? One of the things we'll see today when they
Hey, Larry,
yeah, yes.
just so what defines damages?
Well, if say that I had a contract to you for 500,000, you defaulted. I put my house back on the market. We marketed it. I got a contract for 480. Okay, so I had you for 500. I only got 480 on the next contract. Then I have $20,000 damages there. Okay, hold on 1 second. We had an Amber Alert coming in over our computers. I had to turn it off. So right there, I've already got $20,000 in damages. Let's say it took me another 3 months to get that new contract. Then I had 3 additional months of mortgage payments, taxes, etc. Had I already put my stuff on a moving van? So that's the kind of things a judge will look at for damages. Not that it was an inconvenience to you, or it cost you, 2 more months payments if you got more for your house. But, people are going to have to go to court and get an attorney for that. Hope they win. So it's not automatic you're going to get the money. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does. Thank you.
And that's why it says in that paragraph, not it's not a penalty. In the for paragraph 28 for the defaulting, that the deposit, the owner may accept it as damages and not as a penalty, because our law does not allow for a penalty in Virginia.
So Larry, what about any like major home fixes that were part of the home inspection report? Let's say, all the windows were replaced and then the buyer just ended up defaulting. Would home repairs also fall under damages because the seller did incur those costs?
I would think that a judge would probably, just my opinion, would probably say that wasn't damages because that was an improvement to the property, and it probably reflected in your next contract. That would be an interesting one to see how they would rule. Okay.
All right, great. Thank you.
Okay. Good. Any other questions here? All right, let's take a look at the appraisal. Oh, okay.
I have another question.
Okay.
With walkthroughs, and I say walkthroughs plural, because we have within the last 7 days to do walkthroughs plural.
Correct.
I had a situation where the listing agent, we were within the 7-day period, and she demanded that we provide her with the walkthrough form after we completed our first walkthrough before she would give us access. So she said, I'm going to deny you access unless you tell me that you're going to provide the walkthrough form to me after this first walkthrough. Why? What would be the purpose of that? I didn't quite understand why she was,
She wanted to try to put pressure on you to only do one walkthrough. Okay. And probably somebody was licensed for quite a while that when we used to do one walkthrough because we all represented the seller, but it has been changed. And if you look at the walkthrough form, okay, it says walkthrough inspections of the property were made on dates.
Right.
Okay, dates. So you could have given her one and made it one and then said, we're coming back for another one. But sometimes, you have to explain to them the language of the contract and just say, look, my buyer is requesting from your seller to allow the walkthroughs per paragraph 11 of the contract. If you are denying it, please get something from your seller, because you leave me no choice but to advise my buyer to get legal advice on this. Okay. We don't want to upset the other side too much, but sometimes you just have to explain the contract to them because they don't know what's in it.
Well, she knows the contract left and right, and I just thought it was a control tactic.
Well, sure it was.
You know, and I'm like, this is ridiculous when the property is vacant too. The property is vacant, and you're trying to vacant it in a combo lock box.
Yeah, she was just doing a power play.
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay. Anybody else? Okay, if a question comes up, just ask me a little later. So I want to go over the appraisal contingency today for conventional. If you have the package, I think it was the last couple pages of the contracts package from 7/20/20. They had another one in here up towards the beginning of the package, but that was the old form. So always make sure you look at the form number on the bottom and the date, and this should say K1359, revised 7/20. Okay. Appraisal contingency, because this changed, it's a major change, and you need to understand how to remove the appraisal contingencies. This contract is contingent or is not contingent upon an appraisal pursuant to this paragraph. Now, a lot of people are removing the appraisal contingency, but not removing the finance contingency. And the reason being, you'll see it in paragraph C. We'll address it as we get to paragraph C. The buyer shall have until 9 p.m. They're recommending 21 days. Remember, your lender cannot even get an appraisal, check for an appraisal until your buyer gives intent to proceed after they receive their loan estimate. So 21 days might not be enough. I try for 30, and I understand most agents are countering back at 30 if they're the listing agent, but my contract's going to have 45 days for settlement, right? And if they want to counter back and say less, then I'm going to go over the adverse consequences with my buyer that if we can't make that date, then you're going to be in default, okay? And what that might mean to them. Following the date of ratification, and there's that capitalized word, so it's the definition we find in paragraph 31A that we discussed before. To obtain an appraisal, if neither box is checked, this contract is contingent upon an appraisal pursuant to this paragraph, and the appraisal deadline is the financing deadline set forth above. Buyer shall deliver notice to seller by the appraisal deadline as follows, and this is the change. We now have an appraisal contingency notice form, okay? And that is form K1349 from 7/20, okay? This appraisal contingency notice. Now, we had a notice before you could send
I'm sorry,
over.
Larry. Where are you reading from?
It's appraisal contingency notice.
Yes.
It's from the contracts package.
Yeah,
you
I
have
got
the contracts package. It was page 74.
Now, I got the appraisal contingency notice, but I don't see where you were reading from. I mean, I didn't get. I guess I don't have a contract. I got a contract here.
Yeah, no, I was originally reading from page 76, appraisal contingency. Okay.
Yeah.
So have you got the conventional appraisal contingency paragraph 5?
No, I got the appraisal contingency notice. I don't have it.
Well, there's the financing, conventional financing contingency notice. If you had your contract package, it was page 76 at the top.
Okay, I got the conventional financial and appraisal contingency addendum. Is that it?
Yes. Okay,
yeah.
and I'm paragraph 5.
Okay. I see it. Yep.
Okay? And
Mhm.
that's where I just read from.
Can you be
And
so
that's where
kind? Can you be so kind to start again? I'm sorry.
it's the first paragraph says this contract is contingent or is not contingent upon the appraisal. You find
Yes.
me?
Yep.
Okay. At the very end of that, that first paragraph, it calls for an appraisal contingency notice to be delivered, okay, by the appraisal deadline. So the other form is the appraisal contingency notice.
Yes. Got it.
Okay.
Mhm.
Okay. So let's take a look at paragraph 5. And I don't know any better way than just read through this to cover all the points. So I'm back in the appraisal financing contingency form, paragraph 5A. Now, A, B, C, and D line up with your appraisal contingency notice. They say the same thing. Okay. So A, the appraisal is equal to or greater than the sales price, and this contingency is satisfied and removed, the party shall proceed to settlement at the sales price. So if your appraisal comes in, no contingencies, okay, then you can remove your appraisal contingency with this appraisal contingency notice. What happens if you never remove the appraisal contingency by the deadline? So they said 21 days. After 21 days, you haven't sent the appraisal contingency notice over. What happens? Well, it continues on, okay? It continues on. So on the page 77, if the buyer has not delivered the appraisal contingency notice by the deadline, it will continue up to and including settlement date. So up until the time the notice is sent or you receive a notice they haven't received it, it just continues on. So you don't have to remove your contingency right away if you don't want to. But if you get the appraisals equal to or greater than the sales price, and the lender says there's nothing under paragraph C, we're good to go with this appraisal, you can remove the contingency at any time. Okay? B, buyer elects to proceed with consummation of this contract without regard to the appraisal, and this contingency is removed. That means if this contingency comes in, low, the price, they're moving forward, they have the cash difference. So the original question we had earlier, if they send a contract over and they no appraisal contingency, no financing contingency, then they would remove it when the appraisal came in. Because look, even if there's no appraisal contingency, make sure that your seller understands no lender is going to make a loan without an appraisal. Okay. So don't be surprised. I mean, if it's a Fannie Mae or Freddie Mac, they're coming out to do the appraisal, unless it's one of the exceptions they allow now. But if it's Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, the appraiser's still going to come out, even though the contract's not contingent on appraisal. They have to allow the appraiser in under paragraph 11. Okay. Now, paragraph 5C is where this gets a little bit interesting. The appraisal is equal to or greater than the sales price, but buyer elects not to proceed with the consummation of this contract because property either 1, does not satisfy the lender's requirements, 2, the appraisal does not allow for the specified financing, and 3, property is inadequate collateral. What does all that mean? To me, that means the lender just doesn't want to what?
We'll improve it because of
They,
inspection.
they just don't want to approve the mortgage.
Yeah.
Why? Well, what if the interest rates are, they gave you 2.5% interest rate. And all of a sudden something goes wrong and the market goes to 4 and you're pretty close to the end of your commitment. Why would they want to make you a loan at 2.5, when it's 4? So they might pull one of these out of the bag to say, it doesn't meet our requirements. Okay. It does happen. I've seen markets where it just changed overnight and all of a sudden there were things wrong with the appraisal. But the inadequate collateral means that what if the market is starting to reverse and property values are starting to go down, okay? And the appraiser makes that notation in their appraisal. There might be enough here now, but if, you know, but in our opinion, how easy is this market to get rid of this property if we have to foreclose on it? You understand what I'm saying? Because if they make the loan at 300,000 and things are really deteriorating, and it looks like we're going to have more than a 3% depreciation in a 6-month period, they may say, even though this came in at appraised value, we're not going to make this loan. We don't want this property back in the future as a foreclosure. And we think the market is going south, and that's, you know, that's going to be inadequate collateral. So, you know, one thing you have to understand, all these appraisals, okay, all of these appraisals have to, no matter what the appraiser says the value is, who sets the appraised value? Well, each company has an appraisal reviewer in their firm. The underwriter has an appraisal reviewer. They're the ones that determine what the appraised value is, okay? So when it comes in, if they think it's not adequate collateral, they're gonna say so. They may even ask for another appraisal to go out and appraise. It could be all kinds of reasons. Could have said in a listing agreement, noted repairs that had to be made or items that had to be completed. A lot of personal property included. I mean, if it's market is a little bit tight and you're selling a house in Lake Anna and you're going to leave the boat as part of the sales price, well, that's going to be backed out of the sales price. It's not adequate collateral to them. So there could be all kinds of reasons. Another one, if you have bars on the windows and people wouldn't be able to get out, the lender, that might be a reason for a lender not to make a loan, okay? There's all types of different things that could fall under that. So when I say my contract isn't contingent upon an appraisal, but I retain my financing contingency, right? And the lender says they're turning my loan down because of inadequate collateral. Is that because of the appraisal? No, I mean, that's probably a grounds for me to be out of my loan because of financing. So we've had some agents going ahead and they have taken and decided we'll pull the appraisal out because we can't get the loan, we can still get out on financing, right? So that would be a good reason to get out of the loan still. So there are some tricks can still be played out there, right? Now, paragraph D, this is the one we need to pay attention to. So if you go to the appraisal contingency notice removal form, okay? And it's the last one there. The appraisal is less than the sales price and buyer elects not to proceed with consummation of this contract unless the seller elects to lower the sales price too. Please see attached written statement setting forth the appreciated value of the property. Okay. Also note that if more than one box is checked, the notice is void and no force and effect. You couldn't have more than one choice. Now, the appraisal came in low. The amount of the seller elects to lower the sales price to it cannot be less than the appraised value. Okay. But when we receive this notice and that box is checked, now we're into paragraph D on page 76. The appraisal is less than the sales price. Buyer elects not to proceed with the consummation of this contract unless seller elects to lower the sales price. Buyer's appraisal contingency notice shall include a copy of the written statement setting forth the appraised value of the property and buyer's proposed sales price, which shall not be lower than the appraised value. Now you might remember the old, if you remember the old contingency. The old contingency said the seller, if the buyer would look, I mean, if the buyer would go forward, the seller would sell the price at that. It was almost an automatic. This now requires a negotiating period. And this negotiating period is very similar to, or almost identical to, removing your home inspection contingency. So the appraisal is less than the sales price. We're into this negotiating period now. In the event of this subparagraph 5D, the party shall have until 9 p.m. Give yourself enough time to negotiate, at least 5 days, maybe 7. After buyer's delivery of the appraisal contingency notice to negotiate a mutually acceptable new sales price. Now, it doesn't have to be back and forth in writing, okay? Does not have to be back and forth in writing. It can be phone calls back and forth. So at any time during the negotiating period, buyer or seller may make, modify, rescind, or alter as many offers and counter offers as described to reach mutually acceptable terms. Buyer and seller may agree on terms by signing a written addendum describing the agreed upon new sales price within this negotiating period. It has to be in writing, signed by all parties by 9 p.m. on the day specified. If not, look at these last words of that paragraph. Otherwise, all offers and counter offers terminate. Even if we've been negotiating back and forth at 9 p.m. on the day specified, all those offers and counter offers terminate unless you guys went back, got an addendum to the contract extending the negotiating period under paragraph D. Now, if everybody agrees to a price after that time period in paragraph D, and everybody goes to settlement and everybody's happy, then don't worry about it. But if it's after that time period and somebody changes their mind and gets an attorney, that attorney's going to say, that offer had already terminated. How could it be ratified? So at 9 p.m., okay, is written in stone there. Now, if you don't have, in buyer's agents, this is where it gets real important, okay? If you don't have that written agreement by 9 p.m. on the day specified, if at the end of the negotiating period, the parties are unable to reach an agreement, buyer shall have the option to void this contract by delivering notice to seller by 9 p.m., 3 days or whatever following the end of the negotiating period. You would have to use a notice to void. Send over that notice to void with a release of the contract. Send both forms over during this election period. Otherwise, if you don't void the contract properly in that time period, this appraisal contingency shall be removed and the contract will remain in full force and effect at the original sales price. What does that mean? Your buyer will be bringing the cash difference to the table. If they don't have it and you didn't void during that time period, then your party's going to be in default. Does everybody understand that? That's the importance of the appraisal contingency notice. It starts this time period. Okay. Now, if the appraisal contingency notice has not been delivered, then go to the next paragraph. If the buyer has not delivered the appraisal contingency notice by appraisal deadline, this appraisal contingency will continue up to and including settlement date. Now, if it's still not delivered, then it sunsets, right, at 9 p.m. on settlement date. However, upon expiration of the appraisal deadline, the seller, at the seller's option, deliver a notice to the buyer that the buyer has 3 days to void the contract, okay? So if your seller if his contingency's not been removed, listing agents, realize You need to sit down and talk with your seller. Give them the pluses and the minuses. Do you want to continue on? Let's look at the market, okay? If we send this notice over, right? Okay? And the buyer voids their contract because we gave them that option. They're out of the contract without penalty, right? So do you want to let it ride a little bit longer? But the closer we get to settlement, if they haven't sent the appraisal over, that's when the seller may decide they want to send this notice over. We have a notice, a form actually for delivering to remove the financing contingency or it becomes void. There isn't a form for this right now. You would just take send something in writing that the seller is giving notice to the buyer, and you have 3 days to either 3 days to void your contract, or you're going forward with no contingency, and that's what it says. If buyer does not void the contract within the 3 days following delivery of seller's notice, this appraisal contingency is removed, and the contract will remain in full force and effect without this appraisal contingency. Okay, so let's make sure we do it right. Okay, make sure we do it right. I think in this package here there is a form for the financing one. You could probably use about the same language for this contingency removal for the appraisal. There's a form for the financing, putting people on notice we haven't received the financing. You could mirror that one in the form you send over. Okay. Everybody understand how this works with conventional financing? That's a little different with FHA and VA, right? Little difference with FHA and VA. So with the
I have a question, Larry.
okay.
When we do this with the appraisal, I mean, the conventional financing and appraisal contingency addendum with the original contract, should we, in the negotiating period, put the days in there, 3 days or 5 days?
Yes, you fill all that out in advance.
Okay, and then the buyer's election, is that something for the buyer to put in, or?
Yeah. So the buyer's election period,
Mhm.
that's if they can't agree. So if we can't agree on lowering the price down to the appraised value, okay, at the end of that negotiating period, which I try for 7 days in that negotiating period, because what if it's a weekend, people are out of town, whatever, we have to give us time to be able to do it. But as far as the removal of the notice voiding, they should be able to make that decision in 3 days. So if we don't have an agreement by 9 p.m., the last day in paragraph B, then we go to, as a negotiating period, then we're into the election period for voiding the contract. I think 3 days is plenty for that.
Thanks.
Okay.
Thank-
Now, yes.
I have a question. You said
Okay.
that you don't have to remove the contingency appraisal. Appraisal give the notice that a contingency is removed. We don't have to do it by that expiration day, right?
You don't have to do it by the date of in the contract, right? In that first paragraph. So if you put 21 days,
Right.
okay, and you don't have the appraisal back, you don't have to do anything, right? You can continue on until you get the appraisal as the buyer's agent, unless the seller has sent over a notice after that 21 days that says, hey, we don't have your appraisal. Then your buyer has 3 days to void the contract or go forward with no appraisal contingency.
Okay, I understand. But what happens after expiration? The appraisal comes in lower than the sale price. We can.
Well, then it's still effective. So say you had 21 days, the appraisal comes in low on the 28th day.
Right.
Okay, you just proceed forward like like it was 28 days.
Okay.
Because you did not receive a notice from the other side that you hadn't sent the appraisal over. So
Okay.
it just continues on like it is until you receive a notice or settlement date.
Great. Thank you.
Okay. Now, it's a little different under FHA and VA. Okay. So with VA and FHA, the buyer has the right to void the contract. Okay. Unless we've reached a mutually agreeable price, lowering the price all the way up to settlement. Okay, so even if somebody sent a notice by statute, they have the right to void. So it's different with FHA and VA. I'm only addressing the conventional today. The process works about the same with FHA and VA, except for the buyer's election period. There is no set negotiating time. So you just, if the appraisal comes back low with FHA, you send the notice over that it came in low, okay? And then, so because the appraisal contingency notice isn't just for conventional, it's for any of them. So now you send it back, the sales price is lower, so the appraisal is less, the sales buyer elects not to proceed with the consummation of this contract unless seller reduces the price. Under FHA, they don't have to do that. They can just say the appraisal came back in low, we're voiding our contract, because under FHA and VA, there does not have to be a negotiating period. Okay. So when you read through the FHA and VA one, or we'll just do that in another day, you will see the negotiating time frame is not there. I mean, there's a negotiating period, but the buyer has the right to void at any time. Even if the seller is willing to lower the price down.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay. Now, I want to look at the lender required repairs here on page 77. Okay. If as a condition of providing financing under this contract, the lender or lenders require repairs to be made to the property, then the buyer will give notice to seller of the lender's required repairs. So even though there's no home inspection contingency, there are certain things that if an appraiser sees them, okay, they may reflect that in their report. And the lender may require those things to be repaired, less likely under conventional than FHA or VA, because FHA and VA have what we call MPRs, minimum property requirements, that had to be met. That's why a lot of people don't like to accept a VA or FHA, because they know they could come back with those requirements. But if there's some glaring thing, even under conventional, they might say, it's got to be fixed. So if that happens, okay, and the buyer sends a notice, remember, a notice is a unilateral communication. So you use a form that says notice and list the things that have to be done. So within 5 days after such notice, seller will give notice to buyers to whether seller will make the repairs. If seller will not make the repairs, buyer will give notice to the seller within 5 days after seller's notice as to whether buyer will make repairs. All right. If neither seller nor buyer will make the repairs, then this contract can become void. So we're basically talking 12 days that we're waiting around to find out if somebody will make the repairs. Okay. So, because remember that it starts the day after delivered. So basically that 5 is 6 for each one of those. So it might be 12 days trying to negotiate whether somebody will make the repairs. If this contract, if they agree that nobody will make the repairs in writing, okay, then the contract doesn't become void. But this clause will not, okay, release the seller from any responsibility set forth in paragraphs titled utilities, water, sewage, heating, essential air, personal property and fixtures, or private well and or septic system addendum. So we have to get this agreed to in writing, or this contract could become automatically void. Okay. So don't forget paragraph 6, lender repairs. We often sweat, will we get the appraisal back at the appraised price because everybody overbid for a property. But if they see any of this other stuff, it can come back and be a problem also. Any questions about this appraisal contingency notice or conventional appraisal contingency?
Yes.
Okay.
I have another question about the conventional contingency. At the top where it talks about specified financing and you get into interest rates, many agents don't fill that in, and I want to know what your position is on that interest rate.
If it is my listing,
Yep.
I go over with my seller at that point that there pretty much can't be a default. Okay, why? Okay, well, what's the alternative financing? So paragraph 2 says if there's a change to alternative financing, I mean to the specified financing, including the interest rate. So there's considered alternative financing, and if they go for alternative financing and they don't get it, they're going to be in default, and that includes interest rate in paragraph 2, of the conventional financing. So how can they, if there was nothing filled in for an interest rate, then how could they ever be in default? I mean, because you say, well, they got turned down at 4.5% interest rate, but did they qualify when it was 4? Well, it doesn't matter. There was nothing in there.
Exactly.
So if there's a rate in there, say 4%, and the rate goes up to 4.5%, and they get turned down for their loan because they didn't lock it 4%, they're going to be in default. But if it's left blank, how are you going to argue that that they got turned down because they didn't lock? So I want something in that. I think that's a good, excellent question. I want something in there if I'm the listing agent, and I point that out to the seller that, maybe we want to count it back. And the agent will say, it says in the letter, that letter doesn't mean anything, right?
Mm-hmm. Right. And so the other thing, especially now, Larry, where the interest rates are low, and half of the agents, they will leave it blank, or they will say to be determined, or they'll say market. And then now that the interest rates are low, they may just put, it says in here not to exceed, but they will put the low interest rate in there. So
Yeah.
if rates were to rise above that low rate, then that's an out for them.
No, it's not. No, it's not. And that's a fallacy. It is not. Okay. Unless there are people still qualify, because paragraph 2 says this financing contingency shall not apply to any alternative financing. And it defines alternative financing, a change to the interest rate. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So if the rate went up from 2.5 to 3 and they still qualify, that would be an out. But if it went up to 2.5, from 2.5 to 3, and they no longer qualify, they've lost the protection of the financing contingency.
Okay, say it again so I can lock it in my brain, please.
Okay, so if they put 2.5, if they put 2.5% interest rate,
yes,
it goes up to 3, and that buyer still qualifies for the loan at 3% interest rate, mm-hmm. then they probably could get out because the rate went above, not to exceed. But if the rate goes from 2.5 to 3%, and that party no longer qualifies at the 3%, then they've lost the protection of the financing contingency because of paragraph 2 that describes alternative financing as any change even to an interest rate. Okay. And it says buyer may substitute alternative financing for the specified. Now, specified financing is capitalized in quotation marks. That means they must be able to do it. All right. So if the rate went up to 3% and they had 2.5 here and they got turned down for their mortgage, right?
Mhm.
Then they're still out because that was the specified financing. And
Right.
if they get turned down at 2.5, they're out. But if it went up to 3, they have to lock that rate. Okay. And it says in paragraph 2, if you go after alternative financing, okay, without the seller's written consent and a new financing addendum if necessary, the buyer waives the protection of the financing contingency. So they better go forward or get turned down at the lower rate. So,
So, okay, so Larry, so say they do put down 2.5%.
mhm,
And they've waived everything else, but they have this financing contingency still in place. And
Uh-huh.
rates do go up to 3%.
uh-huh,
So, and they're looking for a way out.
uh-huh,
And now that rate is above what they put in specified financing.
yep.
So that does allow them to not be in default if they at 3, right? If it
No,
goes up to 3.
not if they don't qualify at 3, because that's alternative financing they were seeking.
Okay.
But
So I would have,
if they still qualify at the 3% rate, then I think then they're okay. They probably get out, okay, because the interest rate exceeded that 2.5. And see, people only read the first paragraph. But that's called specified financing. That
right.
is setting a definition in the contract, right? So alternative financing is any change to what's in paragraph 1, including the interest rate.
Okay.
Okay. So if you're a buyer's agent, have your people lock their rate. Okay. You guys, the lender I use and have used for 30 years, we lock the rate. He gives the people one-time float down. Check with your lender and see if they have the same program. Some people want to play the game off. It's 2.5, it could go down to 2, right? Don't do that. You're putting your buyer in a tough position. The good news is about all this, how many agents out there do you think have any clue what this contract says? Okay. I'm a realist, not many. All right.
Yeah, not this detailed.
So, if you sound like you know what you're talking about, you can generally get away with it unless somebody like me that actually knows what's in here. And our agents that have been with me, and that's why we decided on Wednesdays, we just go through this contract line by line to see what it says, because there's so much stuff in this boilerplate that people just do not understand because they have never really read it. Okay. And that's why they have that alternative financing. Okay. And why we have capital letters in the contract and those quotation marks.
Right.
So
Larry, if you're representing the seller and you're presented with offers that does not have this information filled in for the interest rate, what do you do?
I discuss it with my owner. If we insist there be something put in here, it is a counter to the contract, they could walk, but without it, here is the dangers. When we look at paragraph 2, when it comes to alternative financing, how could it be alternative financing if the terms had never been established under paragraph 2 of the sales contract, paragraphs 2A and 2B of the contract, and this addendum. Okay, so if it's never been if there's no interest rate, what was the specified financing that they're changing to?
Right. But
Okay.
that's a good point that you said, because I would, instead of me just demanding that the other agents put it in there, what you said is excellent point. Discuss it with the seller. Say, hey, they don't have this defined, and it's a countering point. So
Yes.
yeah.
Okay. I can't make those decisions for my seller. My job is to go over and tell them the pluses and minuses of the contract.
So is it in the seller's best interest to make sure that there's an interest rate specified in paragraph 1?
Yes, because otherwise, what's a specified financing? And you know what I say 2BD means? It's too bad, dummy.
Good, Larry.
Yeah. Coach
Any-
Epley would be proud of you, Larry.
Yeah. Any other, any
Well,
other
Yes,
questions?
I just want to say, and for the buyer, if there's nothing in there in paragraph 1 as far as the buyer is concerned, and say something happens, the buyer has an out because, right? Because there
Well,
was
it's not an automatic out, but you know, when we get attorneys involved, the attorney's going to say, well, what was the alternative financing? There was never specified financing agreed to. Okay. So, you know, we don't want to get to that point. So I discuss with buyers, you know, also it's my job to discuss with the buyers. Look, this is what it means. This is not a get out of jail free card here because you put 2.5 and the rate goes up. You know, let's make sure your lender that you've chosen, because sometimes they've already gone to the lender because the cheapest whatever. You know, will they give you a lock? And will they float it down one time automatically? So have the discussion with your buyer clients, okay? If they
And
want to play the game.
can you
You know,
clarify? Can you clarify? Float it down
okay?
automatically.
So a float down means that if we don't lock the interest rate and the rate goes down, okay, and the lender says, well, the rate's now 2.25, I can say lock it. Okay, we allowed it to float out there, just, you know, like a cloud. And then when the rate gets right, boom, I lock it in. Okay, the flip of that is, though, it could go up. So there's a gamble, right? So if we're going to, what we call float, just let it ride to see if it goes down, we're also taking the risk it could go up. So when I meet with my clients, with Doug, I asked Doug, I said, what is the highest interest rate? The highest interest rate that my people still qualify for if we want to play the game. And that's what I put in here, because I don't want them to be faced with a default situation. It doesn't say so if we put 4% in here and the market's 3.5, okay?
Mhm.
So some listing agents might look at that and say, well, you know, the people they must not have real good credit because their interest rate's higher, you know, because this is, you know, but the flip of that is, I'm allowing my person the flexibility. You understand you can still get the loan at 4. If you want to play the game that it could go from 3.5 to 3, we're not going to put you in a position of being in default in paragraph 2. No, I mean, you got to just play the options and tell everybody, you know, their choices. Unfortunately, not too many agents do that. Okay. And I'm a realist, you know, been around a long time seeing what goes on out there. But remember when I discuss agency, paragraph 2B of our agency statute says, I have a duty to establish a strategy to obtain my client's objective. Okay. And so I'm going to discuss all that because we all have the same objective. We want this to get to settlement, least amount of headaches and problems for everybody, and everybody be happy. So discuss
Larry.
Another question, Larry.
okay.
I've seen it where in paragraph 1A, they will put a fixed loan over 30 years, and they will put that in there, but not the interest rate.
Well, you need the interest rate,
Yes.
you know, in order for there to be a default, in my opinion. Okay.
Thanks. Thank you.
And look, it also says alternative financing. If I say, if my seller accepts your contract based on conventional financing, and all of a sudden the lender says we can't do that, we need to use FHA, you need to go back and get the FHA contingency addendum signed, because there's a lot of differences between FHA and conventional. And if you don't do that and your party gets turned down for an FHA when it was supposed to be a conventional, then they're going to be in default because you didn't get the seller to agree. Now, if the seller agrees to the interest rate changes in writing, or the loan programs, that becomes the new specified financing. okay? But also remember that if you're going to have new specified financing, you probably also need to extend your settlement date because it's probably going to require new disclosures, et cetera, okay? So make sure that you balance out these different paragraphs in the contract. I think somebody else had a question.
Yes, this is Sandra again.
Uh-huh.
Can you share with you, are you at liberty to share with us the lender that you've been using for 30 years who does the float down?
I use Doug Inger with Prime Lending, okay? Not saying use him or whatever, it's just that's who I've been dealing with. Doug Team teaches with me also a lot. So not always the cheapest lender, but in my opinion, one of the best out there. There's a lot of good lenders, just make sure that you know what their programs are. And we have some good lenders associated with our firm also.
Okay, you said his name is, your guy, you said his name is who, Doug?
Doug Inger, E-N-G-E-R.
Okay,
You can contact me separate, okay?
okay, thank you.
Any other questions today? Well, great. Sun's shining here in Daytona Beach. I'm going to go hit the golf course.
Enjoy, Larry, thank you.
I will. Thank you.
Larry, you're not going to run no routes? You're not going out there and run no routes and catch the rock?
Nah, still recuperating from this knee.
Oh, so
I got
that
that-
prevents,
got-
so you
got
can't,
Got that
I'm
knee
sorry.
replacement. They told me no sharp cuts.
oh, so you can't run that 440 no more, huh?
Nah, those days are over.
Okay.
Hey, thank you, Larry. Appreciate
you.
all the
All right.
help.
All right,
All right.
Larry. Thank you, thank you.
See
Appreciate
you
it.
guys Wednesday. We're going to do contingencies and clauses if you, contingency and clauses addendum if you join me.
When you gonna do short sales? Larry?
Oh, that'd be a while yet.
Oh,
Okay.
thank you.
Have a good day.
Thank you, sir.
Bye.